Bună ziua, doamnelor și domnilor, prieteni, civace. Eu tare mă bucur că am revenit cu un nou episod al podcastului Prepare for Future. Suntem la episodul numărul 49, dacă eu nu greșesc. Și astăzi avem un oaspete special. Ca de obicei, este vorba de Ambasadorul Marii Britanii aici în Moldova, Fischer, cu care o să vorbim despre viitorul drepturilor umane și a corupției, ceea ce nouă tare ne place să discutăm de dimineață și până în seara aici în Moldova. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for coming to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I'm really glad to have you here, and if you don't mind, we should just dive right into the topic.
Let's go.
Seeing how corruption has kind of always followed humanity, right? Whenever there was some sort of government, there was always some sort of corruption there.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, we're kind of, thanks to the digital era, we're finding ways to fight corruption in a way which, let's just say, they would have to be really creative in order to continue being corrupt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have digital traces, you have all that stuff. So from your experience, how has the evolution of the anti-corruption fight on a global scale changed in the past decade?
Well, that's a big question to start with, Alex. Thank you for that. But
My pleasure.
but it's important. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that there has always been corruption. Unfortunately, it seems to be part of the human condition that some people will exploit position and power and connections and will not play by the rules. And we have something called the rule of law, which is the basic fundamental concept that protects us all in front of the law in civilized countries. But there's always forces that
Human
try
factor.
and get around it. The human factor, yeah. And then I think the fact is that as technology advances, those that seek to break the rules take advantage of technology, and those that seek to protect us against the breaking of the rules also use technology in their efforts to support and maintain the rule of law. So I'm not sure the balance has changed greatly. I think the balance would change between the corrupt and the, let's say, the forces of anti-corruption. If one side got ahead of the other in the technological stakes, but it seems to me that as technology is available to everyone. If we're talking here about big corruption, if we're talking about corruption in the financial sector, if we're talking about the bank fraud, that unfortunately crippled the Moldovan economy a few years ago. Obviously, there was an element in there of human interaction. Human beings were making deals and arrangements to do certain things, change certain rules.
And it was super complex, right? Like you'd have to really look into it to catch it.
You would. And in the end, when it was time for the architects of the fraud to move the money out, of course it went through technology. I mean, technology assisted the flight of the capital. And that wouldn't have been possible 100 years ago or 150, 200 years ago if you had to literally go along to the bank and remove, a huge stash of gold, and walk, or take a stagecoach to the port and jump on a ship. You'd probably be caught at some point very quickly. But that money flew, almost literally. Through technological means, and and then you come to the other side, those who are working to maintain the law and defend it. Of course, they have the ability to study and analyze the traces that those electronic transactions left. But it's very complicated. And I'm not an expert in that field, but I mean, we all know it's very complicated.
And I know sometimes, even if they do have this trace, like exactly where the money went, right? Even to the point where someone actually cashes out, who it was and where it was. But then you have certain countries or certain banks that just don't disclose that information because they say, well, it's confidentiality, we protect our customers and all that stuff. So it feels like it's a game of cat and mouse, like Tom and Jerry never ended, right? They've always been trying to catch each other. Sometimes they've been working together, okay, there's this one corrupt guy, just like I think thieves work like that. Mm-hmm. So if the police knows there's a well-established group of thieves in an area, they don't touch them because whenever there's a new thief in the area, they will Call the police and tell, hey, there's this new guy. He's stealing. We don't think he should be doing that. We have all the proof that you need. So just speculating. What do you think? Would we have to somehow push these big players into abiding to the rule of law internationally? How would you approach something like this? Because if he goes to Switzerland or Cyprus or any, you're like, oh, yeah, can't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the British ambassador, so I can only really talk about the UK in that sense. I don't want to comment on other countries' banking regulations and environments, other than in general terms. I mean, you're absolutely right. Some jurisdictions are more open and more helpful to international law enforcement than others. And that is a reality. It is, in a sense, it's an ongoing, long game of trying to establish cooperation and find common ground with those jurisdictions, I think. And certainly between states, there is a conversation between most states of the world with each other, and usually where there is a pattern of illicit finance flowing from one country into the other, that becomes part of the bilateral conversation between those countries, and certainly between ourselves and Republic of Moldova, that is part of our bilateral relationship.
And UK has been helpful in our fight with corruption.
Yes.
The big corruption, I mean, yeah.
Absolutely. It operates through fairly well-known and formal channels. A request for mutual legal assistance has to be presented by one country to the other through the respective competent authority. And certainly in the UK, we respect those requests when they come from any country. But of course, some are better formulated, clearer, with more evidence of illegality having been carried out, and more credible. And those are the ones that get acted on. And I have to say, in my time here, I've been here for 4 years, there have been quite a lot of requests by the Moldovan authorities to our authorities to look into specific aspects of specific investigations. And they've been not only well presented and well argued, but the quality has increased and improved over the time. Certainly in the last couple of years, I'd say the clarity and the quality of the requests that we're seeing from the Moldovan side has improved a lot. And this helps us to respond well. So at the moment, without wishing to comment on any individual case, we're in a good place. We've responded to everything we've been asked to respond to so far, and we'll continue to work with Moldova to do that.
For those wondering, how does it really work? Does the Moldovan government come to you, or do they? Does the ministry contact the Ministry of UK, and then they connect different? How does it actually? Because I'm guessing it's a complex process.
Yeah. Broadly speaking, the contact is between the expert agencies. So here it would be the Prosecutor General's Office or the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, or in some cases the Ministry of Justice, depending on what the nature of the request is. And it would be sent directly into our system through a part of the UK government which receives these requests from countries. And then depending on the nature of the request, it gets assigned to police force to investigate, or to the Crown Prosecution Service, which is our prosecution service, and that's how it works. As an embassy, we're not part of the chain, but we obviously are interested that the chain is solid and that the transfer of information.
So you fortify relationships, and
we help. I mean, in practical terms, we help to make sure that important requests from Moldova, in this case, are being reviewed promptly and properly on the UK side. And from time to time, I will have a conversation with head of the National Anti-Corruption Centre or the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor, and just to check in and say, are we doing our part of this, well? And so far, I've been assured that the cooperation is very good.
That's pretty cool. And because London is kind of a financial capital of the world, right?
Yeah.
Because we've seen, all the oligarchs from Russia that fled the country in the 90s ended up in the UK. So everyone somehow manages, or not manages, wants to go to the UK and thinking they're safe, right? And then the authorities call and they say, well, how about we loosen, we kind of tighten the knot a little bit and you don't feel as safe anymore. We will find your this is just like in that Taken movie, remember? I don't know who you are, but I will find you.
Right.
And I will stop you.
Yeah, I mean, of course, a lot of capital did move into London, as you say, in the 90s in particular, not just from Russia, but from other parts of Eastern Europe and from different parts of the world. Not all of it was clean. Not all of it was the kind of capital we want in our country. And we were obviously then faced with the problem, and we are still faced with the problem. We're trying to deal with it as best we can. In the particular context of the war, which obviously brings a lot of Russian capital in London into sharper focus, we've imposed sanctions on many Russian.
Yeah, UK took a lead on this. Yeah,
we're one of the countries that's probably done as much as anyone else. Along with the European Union, of course, with the US. I think we're up there as well, and we're taking it very seriously. And difficult to control every single transaction that comes in or out of the City of London or the London financial system. And of course, we can't claim to be completely on top of everything at a particular moment in time, but we put a lot of effort into tackling illicit finance and tracking down those illegally held assets and taking steps against criminals that abuse our country.
Yeah, and it's obviously because it's easy to say you're in Moldova. I'm like, okay, so this guy went there and he took all of his assets and UK didn't do anything. But then you sit in the UK and you're like, we have a bazillion transactions per second from different people, and an investigation lasts months or years. So by the time we also have limited personnel working on this. So you have to contact the authorities. They have to tell you, have to process it, and it takes time. It's not like they just go, oh no, stop this. It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that. Where there's rule of law sometimes takes time. I mean, usually is a slow process because it has to be in order to be solid, credible, and and justice has to be done properly. So these things do take a long time, but sometimes quick steps can be taken as well. For example, when we sanctioned Plahotniuc and Shore for anti-corruption, I mean they were sanctioned by the UK government December last year because of corrupt activities they'd carried out here in Moldova. And that means that they cannot carry out any business transaction in the UK or in any UK-dependent territory.
And with any pounds, right? The currency too.
It's not that the currency doesn't matter. It's the location. I mean, where we have jurisdiction, which is UK and UK's territories of Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, these territories, they cannot carry out any business transaction.
And then the US did the same, and some other countries did the same. So you limit the possibility of them to actually try to use the money that they stole, right?
Well, that's right. You do limit it, and you freeze assets that they may have, and you ensure they can't do more business, at least in your jurisdiction. We can't control what they can do in another jurisdiction, another country, but we do our bit. We look after our part of the garden, as it were, and we hope that the neighbours will do the same. The book isn't closed on sanctions against Moldovan citizens who have carried out major acts of corruption. We also have sanctions regimes to do with the Russian war. Many people have been sanctioned because of business activities which are supporting Russian war effort, but not Moldovans. But I'm just saying in general.
Yeah.
And we have human rights sanctions as well, which we use quite sparingly, but these are usually for politicians, political leaders who are guilty of serious human rights violations. So the book is not closed on any of these sanctions regimes, and there could be more Moldovan people sanctioned in the future. we don't know.
Speaking of human rights, Moldova has been going up on the scale of respecting human rights. And what happened with the war last year, how the country helped Ukrainians fleeing war, and how we still do it. There's 100,000 Ukrainians still in Moldova. Seeing it from a macro standpoint, right? Because you have to look at it from a macro standpoint. What steps do you think are still needed to be made to fortify human rights here in Moldova?
I think when you talk about human rights in Moldova, you come immediately to the Transnistria conflict. If we take first the part of Moldova which is controlled by the constitutional authorities, I think there, let's get it out there to begin with, there is absolutely no evidence of any deliberate violation of human rights as a matter of government policy here. I mean, there are countries in the world where it's government policy to violate human rights in order to either protect power or to attack
discord
so discord, reduce the potential for others to come in and criticize, silencing freedom of speech and so forth. There's no evidence at all of that, including going back, through recent years here in Moldova. Nevertheless, no country is perfect in terms of its human rights record. There are issues everywhere. I suppose the issues that we all know still exist here in Moldova include the conditions in the prisons. I mean, international assessment continues to point to prison conditions as being a problem here and not up to the human rights standards. In particular, I understand from the most recent assessments, it's largely failure to protect prisoners against other prisoners, the violence carried out by other prisoners. So it's not an official policy to violate the rights of prisoners. It's a failure to protect against other prisoners carrying out violence against other prisoners. So that's an area, a particular niche where I think action probably is needed, and I think the government knows that. That's
there was a Netflix documentary. I don't know if you've heard it or seen it. So there's a Netflix documentary called World's Toughest Prisons.
I've seen a little bit of it.
Yeah, that season 6, episode 1 was about Moldova.
I didn't know.
And the guy, I think
he's a Brit.
He was convicted in Britain. I think it was a wrong conviction.
Right.
It's not relevant. But
I thought you meant the presenter. The presenter's
the presenter,
right?
yes,
yeah. Program.
And he was an inmate, so he got out.
Right.
His story doesn't matter, but he goes to the toughest prisons in the world where it's really hard to survive. It doesn't matter if it's the government that's not helping you or the situation inside prisons.
Sure.
And he went to the prison in Rezina. And I must say that it was a little shocking to us because he went to Latin American countries where it's horrible there.
Yeah.
And he said Moldova's prisons are pretty bad. They're really bad. And even if you look at the prisons, the prison at Baiorhei, I forgot what it's called. It does not look like a place you want to go to.
No.
Even to work. It's hard.
Yeah.
And then it all comes down to what? Money, right? You need very expensive facilities to.
And I think that's the point. It's not. It's often lack of resource that leads to a failure to fully uphold citizens' human rights. It's certainly not a lack of political will. I know that for a fact here.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the government here will get there. They have plans to. On the prison dossier, of course, they have plans to build a new prison, which will be to international standards here in Chisinau. And I think that will be a major step forward, but it's expensive. I mean, the other area that, of course, is a human rights issue would be access to justice. I think access to justice, being sure that you get a fair trial, by a non-corrupt judge, back to corruption.
Yep.
The investigation into your alleged activity having been carried out by a non-corrupt prosecutor. These are basic human rights. It's called access to justice, as you know.
And they're always connected.
And they're always connected, and that hasn't been the case here, as we know, ever since the time of the captured state and going back before that. But again, the government's, got a pretty vigorous program of justice reform. and it's working its way through it, and it's very complicated and time-consuming and difficult. They're doing it in I think, a very consistent and respectable manner, taking advice from the Council of Europe, from the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe, which is the ultimate arbiter of what good justice systems look like and what they don't look like.
Does UK pitch in?
We support we support the justice reform in the sense that we recognise it to be a good way to tackle the problem, and we have endorsed candidates who have gone on to the various commissions that are carrying out the vetting and so forth. So yes, in that sense we do. We are also supporting anti-corruption institutions here through some of our project work, along with other partners. So back to the question of human rights. I think the government would be the first to admit that at the moment the justice system in this country is not fit for purpose. That's why they're trying to change it and improve it. So I don't think there's any great scandal here.
And there's so much fighting back from the corrupt side of it.
That's going to be the way of all things, really. Those that want to resist change, that is a good change, a change towards a rule of law. If somebody's fighting back against that, then you've got to ask yourself, well, what's their motivation? Why are they objecting to this? What to the vast majority of citizens of the country looks like a good thing to do. To ensure that none of your judges have enriched themselves through selling decisions, and none of your prosecutors have likewise enriched themselves or their associates and families through abuse of their position. I mean, surely all citizens, if they stop and think about it, would rather have honest people in the courts than crooks, or running the courts anyway. So I think it's a no-brainer for most Moldovans, and it is for most citizens, that they want honest justice. The government here is trying to deliver that. And
you can't fight it by using their tools, right? Because how are you doing a reform and enforcing the rule of law if you have to use their tools? So people are like, why don't they just remove that judge? Well, you can't remove a judge because it's not what the rule of law says. Yeah,
exactly. And then who guards the guards? I mean, that's a system that can easily be abused. You need transparency. You need credible, defensible way to address human rights problems, and in this case, the corruption in the courts and the prosecution services those issues have to be addressed transparently. That's why the Venice Commission, this international body of respected experts, is so important. And it's good to see how carefully the Moldovan government takes heed of what the Venice Commission says. Even though that slows things up. It's better to get to the right place a little bit more slowly.
Slow and steady.
Than get somewhere that you might still think is the right place, but cut all the corners to get there, but leaving questions unanswered. And then you open yourself up to all kinds of, challenge.
There was always this, I used to say that if you do things by cutting corners, eventually, somehow naturally, just like there's always been corruption, and the bad guys or the opposition gets to come to power. And if you leave them levers that they could use against you because you cut corners, then you will be doubly unhappy. Yeah. Because it's even going to be hard, because you set precedent, right? Yeah. And then law likes precedent.
Yes. Yeah. You need the checks and balances, even though they hold you up. That's democracy. That's the way to go about things. Yeah.
Any other rights that we still have to respecting rights that we still have to work on?
We've only really got halfway through that item. Let's say that prisons and justice are areas that the right bank, Chisinau-controlled Moldova, needs to address, and it knows it. I think when we look at the Transnistrian region under its de facto leadership, there's a whole different situation, and I think everybody recognizes that the human rights situation on the left bank is deplorable and getting worse. We can start by the lack of freedom of movement. I mean, this is Moldova. This is part of Moldova we're talking about here, that a legal separatist regime has sort of taken control of with their Russian backers. And, access to that region is not guaranteed and it's not free for Moldovan citizens who happen to live on the right bank. Similarly, access out for Transnistrian residents is not always guaranteed, and they shouldn't have to go through the whole palaver of showing documents.
You can get arrested for asking questions.
Yeah, and then we get into the whole question of, the things that the de facto authorities can penalize you for and punish you for, are really up there with some of the most repressive states in the world. I mean, they have this so-called extremism strategy, countering extremism, but they don't define even in that document what extremism is. And extremism can include, questioning whether Transnistria should be an independent state, which, that's absurd because it isn't an independent state. So, but you can go to jail for that. Not recognizing the authority of the so-called president, criticizing any aspect really of the way the region is run and managed, whether it be brutality in the armed forces or in the prison service, gets you serious trouble, as you know. So there's that. There's a lack of freedom of expression, which is basically what that is. There's the impunity for those that have the power to uphold the so-called law, which isn't a law, but that's how it is de facto. There's impunity. There's use of the justice system, insofar as we can call it even a system, to punish their own subjects and citizens. Deplorable conditions in prisons. We have records of that from people who've survived them and come out. So a whole range of very serious human rights issues there. And I think ultimately it's going to take a change of leadership there before we see any significant improvement. Because, repression is one of the few tools they have to actually retain control.
We've actually seen, this will come out next week, but this week, yesterday, Nagorno-Karabakh stopped existing. They've said that our republic no more, it's not separatist anymore. We're joining with Azerbaijan, and it's over. So I saw on the internet, people started asking questions. So what would happen to Transnistria? How would that work? When are they gonna say we're done? And then you had President Maya Sandu on a recent interview speaking that when we join the European Union, it'll probably be in steps. The right bank, and then we'll see what we do about the left bank, and that even complicates things more, right? How can you have half the country join and then the other half still has to work on it? So it almost seems like we like things complicated here.
Not sure you like it, but it certainly is complicated.
Yeah.
The whole situation is a sort of, Moldovans in that sense are prisoners of history, and the history of your country better than I. But that's how we ended up here. And of course, Russia is trying, as we see in Ukraine now, to preserve what used to be its empire, the Soviet Empire, the Russian Empire. No great difference as far as control of territories around the fringe of Russia is concerned. And Russia's not, clearly under the current leadership, not ready to give that up. And it has got de facto a grip on Transnistria. But I think that grip is probably getting weaker. I think we've seen what this government in Chisinau has managed to do in terms of dependency on Russian-sourced gas. In other words, it's no longer dependent on Gazprom. It's working very hard.
And it happened so fast.
Yeah, it happened within 2 years. I think, I've said in a meeting recently with members of the government here, Moldova has shown Europe the way in terms of switching that dependency. There are still countries in Europe which are very heavily dependent on Russian gas.
Yeah, like Germany and other countries.
And one or two others. Moldova has switched in terms of gas, or at least it's put itself in the position where it now calls the shots on where it gets gas from, with international support, of course, but also from the EBRD, which is a loan to Moldova from the European Bank. So anyway, they've done that in terms of.
I like being an example.
It's a very good example, Alex. It really is, and should be proud of it. And there's a sort of a strategy for diversifying electricity supply, which we all know about, with important infrastructure being built between Moldova and Romania, which again will change the balance of power, if you like, in the negotiations with the Russian-owned power plant over in Transnistrian region. So economically, things seem to be heading in the direction of reintegration. And then you can look as well at the trade that entrepreneurs in Transnistrian region are doing. They're increasingly trading with Europe and less with Russia.
And they have to abide by the rule of law. And then they're like, yeah, okay, fine, we'll just deal with Moldovans the way Moldovans want to.
Well,
if it makes me money. Yeah,
they've got to do business, and is it that difficult really to fill in a few customs forms so that you can sell your grain or your sunflower seeds or whatever it is you make and sell them not just in right bank Moldova, but sell them in Romania, sell them further afield. We even have exports from the Transnistrian region going through Moldovan customs to the UK.
Oh, okay.
Not very much, and we actually have got a project that we're working on with United Nations, with UNDP, and with Swedish friends in Transnistria, which is helping small business to see the opportunities for doing business further west.
Yeah, and then you ask them, do you want to sleep at night knowing that your business is safe, that no one's going to come take it? Or do you want to not sleep at night and just wonder, who do I bribe to keep the business? That doesn't let you live long enough to enjoy it.
Most people, when you ask them, be they Transnistrian or Moldovan, I find, how do you want this conflict to end? Peacefully, and of course people want peace. And I think all of the the direction of economic travel, if I put it that way, is towards reintegration. I think the hearts and minds of people obviously have to be ready for that as well, on both banks, if I may say.
I'm really glad we're working hard on this. It's not something that you notice every day, We've gotten so used to all these 5+2s and then ministers of reintegration doing something, saying something, because as a general population, like, you guys have been meeting for 30 years. What have you done? Like, we don't see it. And then now, with all the steps that we're taking to join the European Union and, Ukraine fighting for our liberty as well as theirs, you see our advancements. And then you're like, you know what? I think they'll just want to catch up with us by themselves. They will see how our standards of living are increasing. They will see the liberties we have. They will see the businesses. We've had, we're slowly having big businesses come to Moldova to invest. Just like you said, we have a lot less energy dependence. USAID has invested $300 million, or is about to, in energy independence and infrastructure in Moldova. And then when the what's the saying? When the king is naked, you will no longer support them in any way, because you'll say, you know what, guys, you should just stop, because you can't buy us anymore.
That's one way it might go.
Yeah. Okay. But so for working with them, it's clearly they have to catch up, or they will. I don't want to say perish, but they have to catch up with us if they want to live better. There you go. But what if we go back to corruption a little bit, to the small corruption? Have you noticed a decrease in small corruption cases, like police, doctors, teachers, all that stuff? How are we doing on that part?
To be honest, I don't I'm not an expert in that, and I'm not. I don't have data on that. I really don't know what to say to that question. I live in this slight diplomatic bubble, I suppose, and I admit that, and I try and get out and talk to Moldovan friends and contacts as much as possible. But I don't have to live the day-to-day life of a Moldovan citizen, so I don't know what kind of requests for small payments here and there people are subject to, and whether that has changed over the last 2, 3, 5 years.
It's totally understandable. But so if we were to tackle corruption, like high-level corruption, how would education help us? Everyone says we need to educate. How does that work exactly?
I think there's two parts to education. There's the formal curriculum, and then there's general life education that adults can impart on children or make available to children, their own children and the children in the society. So there's two sides to education at least. I'm not sure that anywhere in the world really has a curriculum item which is
anti-corruption university.
Yeah, I mean, lawyers, of course,
Yeah.
if you get to that stage and you're studying law, then you might, get heavily into what does corruption look like and what are the laws against it. I mean, there are obviously laws against corrupt acts. They are crimes. But that almost is, that's not what you're really talking about here. I think you're talking about the average child who doesn't go on to become a lawyer.
Or even adults, Yeah.
Or even adults,
Yeah.
sort of a sort of increased awareness of the damage that corruption does, and perhaps trying to create more public opinion demanding an end to it.
Learn to say no.
Learn to say no, but it's hard to say no if you're the only one saying no, sometimes. And if you're, you need a surgical intervention or something, and the hospital kind of always asks for a bit of extra money in order to get you up the queue,
Or give you the attention you need.
or give you the attention you need, or your child's about to be born and you need attention. You haven't got the luxury of waiting. So I suspect that I suspect a lot of people don't need educating. They probably need a government that is really determined to make a change, which I think they've got actually now, and I think also you need the economic growth that basically removes or reduces the temptation or the need to ask for a bribe or a little extra or this or that. So I mean, I think if you're looking for the solutions, I don't know that education is really the solution, because I don't think people actually are short of, it's not that they don't understand, it's just that the system doesn't always allow you to live a life free of the request for a bribe or the sometimes perhaps the temptation to ask for one if you really have got so little resource and you can't feed your family. I can understand why the pressures are there. Not sure education's needed in that sense to help get over it, but economic growth will. I mean, if you look at the least corrupt countries in the world, they're also amongst the wealthiest. It's not a coincidence. If doctors and teachers and government officials are all paid a decent salary, then they are less likely to knowingly break rules in order to boost that salary.
I was going to ask you, but we did increase the salaries for the ministers, for example. But then there was backlash.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would you increase the salary of the minister to 50,000 lei, which is gross, by the way, if the average person makes this, and then when you ask him, so how do you want them to not be corrupt?
Yeah.
Or have the proper professionals there that would be able to run the ministry if you pay them 8,000 lei a month?
It's got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
I think there have been countries in the world where they've gone down this route of trying to increase the state officials' salaries. Singapore is always the example people come up with when you talk about countries that have tackled corruption. It was a very corrupt country back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few years after independence, it had no resources other than its geographical location. It had interracial tensions, and it had a very corrupt set of authorities really throughout the system. And they clawed their way up through many, many measures. No tolerance to corruption, and
Yeah, they're pretty tough on that.
pretty tough, and they were particularly tough in the 70s and 80s, let's say, when their growth miracle really took off. And but they did also increase salaries quite significantly for state officials, and in fact they pegged the salary of the state sector somewhere. They have some sort of mechanism to, as I understand it, to peg it a little bit to private sector salaries. So private sector salaries are probably always going to be on average higher because that's,
Yeah.
obviously you've got some very, very well-paid people at the top end. But nevertheless, they ensured there was some sort of mechanism for pegging the senior civil servants with senior people in the private sector, salary-wise, so that
And then
there was less
shocking,
less differentiation,
less corruption.
less corruption. If you put these
Yeah.
two things together,
Yep.
Firstly you'll go to Changi jail if you break the law seriously. That's not a place you want to be. And secondly, you probably don't need it anyway.
Yeah.
Because you
You can buy
you're
stuff
earning
you want.
enough.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's much more peaceful for the vast majority of us to live peacefully within the law, as long as you respect the law as such, than to live, I imagine, either at the very edge or beyond the law, and you're constantly vulnerable then. And for most of us, if you don't have to do that, why would you? You sort of live within your means, as it were.
Just like the Americans say, death and taxes, and you can also add to it like justice system. It's slow, it's hard.
Yeah.
It will probably take forever, but one day it will catch up to you wherever
Yes.
you are,
It will.
and you will pay for it.
Well, yeah, there's lots of examples of that.
We're nearing the end of the conversation. Do you have any advice to our government in addressing the current and the future challenges that we might have, both for corruption and human rights issues?
It's not for me, Alex, to
Yeah.
advise the government here. But if you want my commentary on what they're doing, I think they're on the right path. Certainly, the UK assessment of the main elements of the Moldovan government's policy is very favourable, very supportive. We have great respect for President Sandu, Prime Minister Rechan, and the government. We recognise that they're trying to do an awful lot quickly, but they're doing it the right way. Resources are an issue, financial and human. There just aren't enough people in some of the parts of the state system to make things happen for the citizen as quickly as everyone wants. And then if you look at the way Moldovan government is facing the hybrid aggression, Russian-inspired and carried out through proxies or directly, it's admirable, it's courageous, and it's the right thing to do. So I can't give advice to a sovereign government, and I wouldn't want to. But they know what they're doing. They don't need my advice, but they do have our country's support.
That's advice enough. You don't need my advice. You know what you're doing.
Who am I to advise the
Yeah.
government?
Well, in Moldova, we like to give advice to the government. So that's why we always have to ask what advice.
But you're
would you
Moldovan
give?
citizens.
Yeah.
You should give advice to the government, and you should give your vote or not give your vote to the candidates
Exactly.
and the parties
That's
that
how
you
you
favour.
punish them or encourage them,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
Your Excellency, thank you for taking the time for coming to the podcast. I really enjoyed talking with you about it, and let's hope that if and ever you come back after your mission is over, you will say, you know what, guys, it's great. Because you probably noticed it more than myself. I've not been here for 7 years. I left in 2014, came in 21. For me, the country was very different. It was like moving to a new country again. So I lived in the US, I came to Moldova, so I had to readjust because there's so much stuff has changed. And that's what I try to tell everyone. Look, it's hard to see when you boil in the soup the changes, the incremental changes, the step by step. And then if you leave for a long enough time, you come back and you're like, oh, it's
different.
Yeah, you guys changed.
Yeah, something's happening here for
Yeah.
sure, and I hope for all Moldovans that it continues to move in the right direction, and everybody's standard of living will benefit.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.